Glory's Bane. This sword belonged to a royal family whose kingdom was destroyed by an evil dragon. The vengeful rage of the family smolders deep within the blade, hidden by the sword's gaudy beauty. Whoever takes up the sword will suffer from the family's bitter curse. Evil dreams will haunt the victim's nights till he is overtaken by a baleful death. A king of a certain small nation was struck by the sword's beauty and took it for his own, but he too became plagued by nightmares, and one day his life and kingdom were taken from him by dragons. There is but one means to escape the sword's curse: slay the same dragon that killed the royal family. But no man has yet possessed the strength to cheat fate and break the spell. King's Blood. In ancient times, this black sword once belonged to a mighty king who built a glorious empire. Under his wise and just rule, the empire thrived and prospered, and knew no equal. But a ripened fruit can only rot. Spoiled by their wealth and prosperity, the servants of the king began to swell with pride and fell into corruption and depravity. Powerless to cease the rot, the king summoned the wicked god into the blade of his sword. He then began to murder his treacherous vassals, one after another. The god inside the blade reveled in the bloodbath. When only the king himself remained, the sword slew him as well, and the silver blade was dyed by the royal blood. Hunter's Joy. In a certain country lived a feudal lord. This lord was enamored of the hunt. Each day he rode out to find animals to slay, his favorite hunting sword by his side. One evening, the animals of the forest gathered together in council. We could not survive much longer. We must kill the Lord if we wish to live. With joy coursing through his veins, the Lord rode out and slaughtered all the animals till not one remained in the forest. By the by, the Lord lived happily unto a ripe old age. Death Dance. A long time ago, there was a small nation that was invaded by a mighty neighbor. The country was helpless as the invaders put its women and children to the sword. In the small country, there was a brave and beautiful princess who became determined to save her home. She disguised herself as a dancing girl and presented herself to the enemy emperor. The emperor, entranced by the beauty of the dance, immediately fell in love with the princess. But as he approached her, she plunged his sword into his breast and slew him on the spot. After that, the mighty empire fell into ruin and decline, and the princess's country was saved. To this day, every girl of the kingdom dreams of becoming the dancing princess of legend. Scream. There was once a handsome young man who stole from village to village, seducing the maidens and promising his hand in marriage. Captivated by his charm and beauty, the young women gave him their land, their gold, their livestock, and their hearts. But at one midsummer festival, his victims met and discovered the young man's Feruds. The incensed women vowed revenge. With the help of the king of the fairies, they cast a curse on the youth, dooming the suitor's still living soul to be sealed within this sword. Even now, from deep within the cold steel of the blade, you can hear the pitiful screams of the young man as he laments his callous crimes. Raven Feeder. A circular-bladed sword owned by a noble family that lived deep within a great forest. It is said that the user of this weapon would be blessed by the gods with 3 lives. The sword was originally designed as a tool for torture. Its outer blade is sharp enough to bisect a man with one stroke, while the inner is kept dull to inflict hideous pain. Poison can be poured into the handle. As soon as the victim is cut, the poison flows into the wound and causes near instantaneous death. So cruel was this weapon judged to be, it was banned by the old kings. Soon therefore after, it became infamous as the tool of assassins. Dragon Hook. An imperial archaeologist unearthed this weapon's blade from the ruins of an ancient holy place, believed to be fossilized remains of some beast. The substance was incredibly hard. With great care and reverence, the scientists tried to sharpen the rock, but the substance was impervious to fire, to acid, and to all tools of his workshop. Driven mad by the unyielding substance that sat reproachfully before him, the scientist smashed it against his head again and again till he fell dead of his wounds. The darkly glimmering substance was the claw of an earth dragon, and only human blood can sharpen its edge. And so for ignorance did another scientist die. Butcher's Joy. Juices oozing from tender, succulent flesh, the sweet aroma of fine herbs. The master cook made dishes of meat that none in the city could resist. Every day, customers lined up outside his inn, waiting for their chance to partake. Even the king himself would sneak down from his castle to sample the master's art. But once he entered his kitchen, the smiling cook's face would grow stern. The meat he used was no ordinary meat. The years passed, and the cook and his inn disappeared from the town, but his cleaver remains as gleamy and sharp as ever, waiting for its next master. Maiden's Kriss. When the great shrine was built, young women were chosen to be sacrifices. They plunged this Kriss sword into their own hearts. The blade glimmers with the soul of its young victims. The first sacrifice was a respected and pious believer. The pure woman was chosen to serve as the foundation stone of the new shrine. The second sacrifice was a kind girl of the village. Though sad to be chosen for her death, she consoled herself with the knowledge that her sacrifice would help others. The third sacrifice was a girl who made her life as a thief. She cursed the gods angrily as her life was taken. At the moment the sword struck home, it coiled and writhed like a wounded snake. Sword Smasher. A sword serrated like a saw, able to cut through enemy weapons. But with each use, vibrations shake the user's arm, causing the flesh to turn weak and translucent like wax. Many centuries ago, there was a brave knight who fought and defeated countless enemies, but as he fought, his flesh became paler and paler. Then came a war on which the fate of the kingdom hung in balance. The knight took the head of the enemy general and won the battle, but he had grown so pale as to be transparent. As the soldiers celebrated the victory, a single arrow struck the knight through his heart, but none could see the invisible knight, and his death went noticed by none. Moon Fire. This sword is forged of a granite that burns red with eternal heat. Only those who enjoy the protection of the moon god, ruler of the cool night, may dare grasp the handle. Legend tells of a great warrior who carried this sword into battle. Roaring a battle cry, he charged into the fray, where 100 enemy archers struck him through with 1,000 arrows. Yet not a drop of blood flowed from his wounds, and though arrows pierced his heart, his strength failed him not. His army was the victor on that day. With the battle won, the warrior returned to camp, but in an instant he laid down his sword. He froze as cold and as still as ice. The protection of the moon god had finally claimed his life. Slaughterism. The sword belonged to a demented painter who murdered innocents every night and collected their blood. With this grisly harvest, he painted masterpieces the likes of which the world had never seen. The painter had a dream. He dreamt that one day he would create paintings so powerful that all who viewed them would be at peace. Every day he painted feverishly, chasing his dream. But none cared for his work, and he began to feel the cold, uncaring stares of others. Eventually the soul of the sensitive artist was broken. Red, crimson, scarlet. In a frenzy, the artist embarked on a rampage of murder and creation. It did not end until he turned the sword on himself and forged his last masterpiece. Soldier's Sword. A sword forged using secret techniques known only to one family. The family's secret was jealously guarded, and no stranger was allowed to learn it. Hoping to discover how the sword was made, a soldier from an enemy kingdom joined the family. His plan was to steal the secret and return it to his own country. But the young soldier fell in love with the family's daughter, and he could not bear to part from her. He confessed his plot and begged her to flee with him back to his country. But when the daughter heard the scheme, she murdered the soldier and then took her own life, and was so the secret of the sword kept within the family. Skald's Song. There were two sisters who were renowned as the greatest swordsmith in the kingdom. No matter who challenged them, none could make a finer sword. One day, a wandering bard visited their home. He sang with a voice so beautiful the gods wept to hear it, and both sisters fell deeply in love with the kind and gallant Skald. Each of them set about making the most magnificent sword so they might win his love. But their bitter rivalry led to them making only dull and brittle blades. Seeing their discord, the Skald offered to take both of them as his brides. With their rivalry ended, together the sisters crafted the magnificent sword and named it Skald's Song. Guardian Sorrow. This sword once belonged to the guards of a holy sage. Though made simply and without ornament, the sword's blade never breaks nor bends, no matter how often it is swung in battle. 14 boys and girls protected the holy sage, all of them orphans abandoned by their parents. They lived together with their master as a family. One day, the party was set on by a gang of brigands. The guards fought a desperate battle, rising again from the most grievous wounds to guard the path to the sage's carriage. At last, not one bandit nor guard was left alive. The weeping sage took the sword his guard had held and blessed it, so that it might protect others as his guards had protected him. Injustice. A sword wielded as a symbol of justice by the successful heroes of a kingdom. The church of the land imbued it with powerful magic so that anyone who fought for justice would be blessed. The first hero was a great general who smashed an invading army. He killed a score of enemy by his own hand. The second hero was a great general who defeated his country from a malicious rebellion. He captured each and every one of the mutineers and, by his own hand, carried out their sentence of death. The last hero was a general who invaded and colonized a foreign land. In this conquered country, he ordered the massacre of tens of thousands of innocent lives. Hymir's Finger. This is the largest sword in the world, too heavy for any mere mortal to lift. It is believed that till now, no warrior has been able to wield it. It was ordered forged by the warlike Vec, the Pitiless, made from melted armor of his vanquished enemies. The sword was announced Vec's might and grandeur to the world. The sword grew heavier and heavier each time it took a life, and it gradually became more and more difficult to wield. At last, even its mighty owner could no longer swing it. One morning, Vec, the Pitiless, was found dead. Besides him, dripping with flesh and dyed scarlet with blood, lay the sword. Who had managed to raise the mighty weapon against him? Flamberge, a sword whose name can also mean fire. The rippled blade deepens wounds and makes them fatal. This was a common sword in days past. In ancient times, a warrior and a dragon fought a battle. Seeing his sword melt in the dragon fire, the warrior tore out the dragon's tongue and wrapped it around his weapon's blade. The enraged dragon blasted a mighty fireball at the warrior. So great was the conflagration that both warriors and the dragon were reduced to ash. All that remained was the sword, untouched by the flames. Since then, the sword has held a special magic against the flames of dragons, but it is said that should an unworthy man try to wield it, he will be engulfed in a column of fire. Nobuyoshi. In a faraway eastern land, there was a poet who made a living reciting songs, but he keenly felt the limits of his own skill, and so made a pact with a ghost. With the power of the ghost inside him, he began to compose glorious and beautiful songs. His fame spread through the city, and before long he was named the official poet to the imperial court. But one day the ghost returned to him, and she said thus, "Your life as a genius poet is over. You shall henceforth never sing a song again." It was as the ghost said. The poet fell silent, and no more songs came from his lips. His dream was gone. He plunged his sword into his breast. It still gleams with the glistening of his blood. Takemasa. When I first met him, I found it hard to imagine that the irascible, smelly monk that stood before me was once a vassal of such a mighty lord. Yet the gleaming sword that he held at his side suggested his tale might be true. What under heaven had happened to bring such knight so low? He told me that he had grown tired of the feuds of the noble families, but it is a hard thing for any warrior to abandon the discipline of the way of the sword. At that time, things might have gone better, he said, looking thoughtfully into the sky. I suppose that now, in some place, he is coming near to the end of his path. Greed's Reward. There was once a great merchant who sailed all the 7 seas, discovering new lands and trading around the world. The merchant amassed a fortune beyond all compare. One day the merchant heard of an enchanted weapon known to some as the Dark Summoner. It is said that the sword was hidden in the ocean to the south, a land swallowed in ages past. The merchant set out, resolved to find the rare and valuable sword. After many adventures and much hardship, he found it at last. The sword was impaled in the mouth of a demon statue. Suddenly bolts of hellfire flew from the sword, and the merchant's ship sank into the watery abyss. Weeks later, his corpse was washed up upon the shore, the scimitar clutched reproachfully in his hand. Wraith Heart. In the twisted, misshapen blade of the sword lies an evil curse. Within it is the hate of a woman who used it to slay herself, and the lover who betrayed her. All who take up this sword are bewitched, and against their own will they find that they must slaughter others without mercy. Only by cutting their own arm can the curse be broken. When a victim cuts off his arm, his soul becomes a part of the blade. He is able to wield it with nothing but the power of his own thoughts. Only one other way exists to break the curse of the sword. If the spirit of the girl were to fall in love with the wielder, then she would lift the spell, but no man has yet won her love. Demon Bane. This sword was forged as an instrument of revenge by a swordsmith whose family was slain by demons. It sucks in the souls of its victims to grow stronger and stronger. The skilled swordsmith was commanded by the king to make a sword to behead demons, but as he struggled to craft the famous weapon, demons appeared at his home. The demons, enraged that such a sword was being made and determined none should ever wield it, slaughtered the swordsmith's family and left him alive to weep over their bloody remains. Burning with revenge, the swordsmith left the corpses where they lay and crafted the demon slayer. But the madman who gripped the weapon was little more than a demon himself. Kaim's Sword. A gift to Kaim from his beloved father. Since he was a young child, Kaim had idolized his gentle father and longed to fight strongly and bravely in battle besides him. But the dark shadow of the Empire fell over their peaceful kingdom. The Empire grew stronger and stronger, until one day Kaim's castle was attacked by imperial black dragons. Kaim, take Fury Eye and flee, so ordered Kaim's father. But even before Kaim was able to answer, his parents were slain before his very eyes. Clutching the sword that was a gift from his father, Kaim swore upon it revenge for the loss of his kingdom and the murder of his parents. Even now, an unquenchable rage still fills his heart. Storm Giver. There was once a nest of vampires that lived in an old castle deep in the forest. Each night, the vampires would creep out their lair and terrorize the helpless farmers of the nearby village. Hearing of the villagers' plight, a renowned vampire slayer came to the village. but he told the villagers that he could not battle an entire nest of vampires alone. Some young men of the village volunteered to help, and together they prepared 4 spears set with powerful crystals. That night, the vampires came shrieking from their lair and attacked the village. The battle raged all night long, but when the morning broke, all that remained of the vampires was gray ash. Ever since, the villagers have worshipped the spears as guardian spirits. Robber King. In the kingdom of a union, a general beloved by the common people slew the wicked queen that had taken power when the king had died. The general came from the lowest classes, making a living as a murderer and highwayman. After killing his 15th victim, he was at last captured by the authorities. Judgment was swift. The sentence was death. But the general had a great advantage. He was an extraordinarily handsome man. When the queen saw him, she could not bear to have him killed. She gave the general all her love, but her love turned into obsession. She became his prisoner, and he took her throne. People who knew him came to call him Robber King. Knight's Vow. A long time ago, there was a dragon who could not fly. This gruff, yet noble-hearted dragon had never seen a human until the day he came across a gravely injured knight. The dragon tended to the knight, but when the human opened his eyes, he stared in fright and tried to flee. In those days, wingless dragons were despised by men as ill omens. But the knight recovered, and vowed as he returned home to repay the dragon. Many years passed. One day, the aged dragon found himself surrounded by an army of men, and he prepared himself for death. "My wingless friend, it has been a long time." Strutting from behind the soldiers came the knight of old, now a king with an army of thousands. The dragon let out a roar of delight. Balberth's Tears. Balberth is the demon who seals all pacts between devils and humans. His evil contracts send ill-fortuned men and women, one after another, into hell. One time, Balberth fell in love with a human woman. This woman's father was very sick, and she appealed to the demon to save her father. But Balberth knew that with a contract, she would be thrown into hell and lost to him forever. He thought, and at last decided that he himself would go to hell in her place. But when he hurried to the girl's home, he found the father dead. The girl's lifeless body lay beside him, as if in sleep. Ignorant of death, the demon tried to shake her awake, over and over again. Broken Dogma. There was once a great sect that boasted 246 shrines and centuries of devotion to the Holy Way. The continuation of the sect's sacred truth was entrusted to the great hierarchy, 47th in the line. The hierarchy was a grave and frankly honest leader. Upstanding as a child of the gods, he was a good and holy man, but at times his honesty made him weak to the pressures of the secular world. One day, the ruler of the kingdom and protector of the sect asked the holy leader, "Who is more just, the gods or I?" The hierarch answered that the gods were, and the king became enraged. The king decreed the sect a heresy, and in one stroke, the proud centuries-old religion was snuffed out. The hierarch, seeing his entreaties fall on deaf ears, plunged his trident into his breast. Battle Lust. The leaders of warriors seeks out their death. Deep in his heart fall the tears of heaven, the lakes of blood glimmering like beacons in the dark. The lesson steals life and blesses it anew. Victor's Spoils. There was once a country founded by 2 brothers, masters of martial arts. One brother fought with strength, the other with speed. Great friends, they ruled their country in peace. One day, a small girl asked the 2 brothers an innocent question. "They say that the 2 of you have never fought, but if you were to have a fight, which one of you would win?" Both answered that he himself would be the victor. Thereupon the brothers began to argue, an argument that grew more and more heated until they found themselves in a fight to the death. Seeing the brothers battle, the angry gods hurled down this mighty spear and impaled them both. Awed by the gods' wrath, the people of the country enshrined this spear in their temple. Wolf's Plague. There was once a small village that made its livelihood from rearing cattle, but it was terrorized by a pack of wolves that slaughtered the villagers' livestock each and every night. Desperately, the villagers tried to protect their herds, but they were defenseless against the wily white wolf that led the pack. Each night, more livestock was lost. As the situation grew more grave, some began to talk of abandoning their homes. At that, the quietest villager of all took up his spear and stepped out into the light. 2 days later, the white wolf was found dead in the woods, impaled by the spear. The villagers raised the weapon over the village gate in hope that one day it might greet the Silent One's return. Ozymandias' Might. This monk's spade was owned by the ruler of the greatest empire of the age, said to control lightning and slice through blackness. It was dedicated as a guardian weapon in the shrine of the gods. A warrior famed for his courage plundered the weapon and set out to conquer the world, summoning lightning and thunder to his aid. He brought nation after nation into his empire. He sat at the center of a vast empire, but the vassal states chafed under his rule and rose up against him. In the end, betrayed even by his own army, the warrior's empire collapsed. he took refuge in a small castle. As the besieging army put the castle to the torch, he held the monk's spade at his side, and together with his favorite concubine, waited for death. Mermaid's Feast. This monk's spade belonged to an ugly mermaid who lived on a solitary island in the South Ocean. With her fearsome song, she would lure the islanders out to sea and feast upon their raw livers. One day, a young man came to the island seeking revenge on the mermaid for slaying his family. The man sliced off the mermaid's tail, leaving her on the brink of death. Unable to swim, the mermaid despaired, seeking forgiveness. She gave to the youth her beloved weapon and begged for the return of her tail in exchange. But the youth knew that she would return to her wicked ways of terrorizing the islanders for their livers that gave her substance. With one thrust of her own spear, the pitiful creature was slain. Magi Sorrow. Far, far to the west was a land of magic, governed in peace by the 500 wise magi of the council. In both night and day the streets shone, and the people lived free of fear or hard labor. One day, the 501st magi was appointed to the council. He was only a child of 10, but was so great his powers and his intelligence that within 2 years and 15 days, he had made leader of the council. A genius of magic, but also a boy of 12, fears assailed him, and bewildered by a life without meaning, he transformed himself into a crystal that would exist for all eternity. Wisdom. In a northern island country, there was a wise man trusted by all people, known as the man who can see 1,000 leagues. He wandered the countryside with the staff in his hand. The staff could cure diseases and injuries in those who touched it. When placed on the ground, it could make even the most barren lands fertile. If the staff was touched to a person, it could tell if the person lied or told the truth. If the staff was touched to a wicked man, that man would fall on his knees and repent for all his sins. If the staff was touched to monsters, they would flee. And if the staff was touched to demons, with words forbidden by the gods, burn them to blackened ash. Audacious. This was the staff of a lean, thin wizard. His mean, indifferent, and cold heart made him hated by the townspeople and his apprentices. Growing fearful for his own life, the wizard used the black arts to form a staff with fearsome power that drew its energy from the wizard's own life force. As the staff gathered more and more energy to itself, the wizard grew thinner and weaker. But the wizard was intoxicated by the staff's power, and he could not let it go, no matter the cost. Obsessed with protecting himself from his resentful apprentices, the wizard clutched the staff tight till he died. In the end, all that remained of him were brittle bones and dried, translucent skin. Philosopher's Staff. There are a number of elements that determine one's own will. Conceptual objects, scientific facts, and empirical realities all play a role when considering an immediate question. Hypothetically, in the regulation of judgment or in the process towards facts concerning the question, any thinker can acquire a rough estimate or intuition based on a person's experience. Alternatively, the process is under the control of reason, what sections to make, on what issues to focus, and so on. In other words, the methods of facts considerations, judgment, and reasoning. Only those who understand the foregoing have the power to understand thought or sense and recognize its worth in others and in themselves, thus achieving true and justifiable belief. Love Keeper. A young couple blessed by fortune were to be wed, but on the night before the wedding, a small shining spirit appeared before the young bride. The ghost whispered in her ear, speaking straight to the weakness in her heart. Do you wish to make him all yours? Do you wish to ensure his heart is yours for all eternity? When the girl recovered her senses, she found this gore-splattered axe in her hand, and before her, the bloody head of her beloved. Now he is yours forever. Even now, the ghost of the young bride can be seen wandering the village, garbed in a blood-splattered dress and clutching the sightless head of the man she was to marry. Crimson Hood. Hundreds of years ago, there lived a noble robber who always wore a scarlet cloak. Unsure what to do with the wealth he pilfered from the corrupt merchants, he melted it down to forge this axe. He was pleased with how he had disposed of the merchant's ill-gotten loot, but as he became obsessed with making the axe even more gorgeous, he started to rob innocents as well. One day, he raided the mansions of the most powerful sorcerers in the kingdom and was quickly caught by the wily wizard. The wizard urged the robber to return to his noble ways. But the bewitched heart of the robber could not be swayed. The wizard cast a spell that sealed the robber in a brilliant red crystal, and he then set the crystal in the eye of the axe. Foul Blade. An ambitious wizard sealed a salamander within this axe. It became imbued with the potent fire magic and even greater destructive power. The salamander whispered to the magician, "Feed the axe blood, and we will become even stronger." Bewitched by the power, the wizard began to seek victims to slay. Well, "Shall you give us more blood?" so whispered the axe, its appetite for flesh growing. The wizard, intoxicated by the power, had no means to resist. Not so long ago, the axe was discovered lying next to a withered mummy as dry as a petrified tree. Even now, the axe whispers to those drawn by the dark night. "Kill," it says. Bone Breaker. This simple, common axe is made of a shaft hewn from plain oak and a head crest crudely from pig iron. A simple, common old blacksmith made it at the beginning of the year in order to open the door of an old shed. Inside the simple, common shed, the old man saw piled high before him the jumbled bones of more men than he could count. He told no one of his find. The simple, common axe, made by simply common old blacksmith, came to be called Bonebreaker. Poison Tongue. There was once a surgeon who saved many patients from sickness and death. Word of his skill spread, and so great did his renown grow that he was appointed physician to the king. Several years passed. One day, the king's daughter fell gravely ill. Despite all the doctor's skills and effort, the illness proved fatal, and the princess slipped into death. A hateful grudge toward the doctor took root in the grieving king's heart. Deaf to the doctor's entreaties, the king sentenced the physician's family to death. Mad with grief, the doctor threw deadly poison in the royal well, and the entire royal household died agonizing deaths. The blade of the axe was sharpened using water drawn from that well. Executioner's Song. An axe used on an executioner's block of an imperial gallows. Forged as an executioner's tool, the axe has severed the heads of more than 1,000 victims. But after it was used to decapitate the very men who forged it, the axe became like a living thing. It seemed to be searching for something as it lopped off each head in turn. Once a popular general was condemned to death, the people watched as he lay his head on the block, and the axe did its bloody work. A headless corpse was neither innocent nor guilty. Hundreds of years have passed, and still the axe continues its grim search. Scores of rulers and kings have fallen beneath its blade as it wends its bloody way through the pages of history. Twin's Fang. A long time ago, there were twin gods who gave man the gift of fire and knowledge and protected him with their wisdom. But mankind fell into corruption, and the twin gods became wrathful. They sent storms and floods to destroy the cities, and the great fires to burn the plains. Acknowledging their sinful ways, the people offered this great axe in penitence. It was a charmed offering, washed in the blood of sacrificed twin children. The gods turned the souls of the young twins in the stars. They then sealed the stars within the axe, a grim reminder to mankind that they must never fall into sin. Sorrow Born. Once upon a time in a small village, a young boy and a young girl fell in love. The boy was kind and just, and the girl was cheerful and bright. By the flowing stream over the hills and through the field they played. Crown of day flowers and a ring of lavender, they promised themselves to each other for all eternity. But one day the girl's family was forced to leave the village to look for work in the city. Though she cried and begged to stay, the young girl had to leave. The tears of the boy and girl fell to the ground and formed a small pond. The bardish was crafted by the spirit who came to live in that lake and was given on a whim to the local woodcutter. Widow's Death. Queen Berthild, daughter of Visigoth King Athen-Agild, was wife to Siebert I of Austrasia and ruled the kingdom as a regent in her son's name after the death of the king. Neighboring Neustria was ruled by Chilperic I and Queen Fergerind. Seeking to expand their kingdoms at the expense of their neighbor, they had Siebert assassinated. They sparked a long and bloody feud between the two kingdoms. The rift between the countries deepened as Brunhild and Fredegund's relatives were murdered one by one. Eventually, Brunhild was betrayed while attending the peace negotiation and was sentenced to death by Chlotar II. This is the pole axe that was used to chop off her head. Feng's Glaive. A wealthy eastern merchant spared no expense when he ordered the forging of this magnificent glaive. So fine is its blade that when it slices off a man's head, the victim feels no pain at all. Yet it harbors evil power. Any man who dares looks into the blade sees a warped image of his face. The greater a man's greed, the uglier his reflection becomes. When the merchant looked into the blade, he saw a reflection more hideous than any other. He could not bear to see the ugly face, and swore never again look at the weapon's shiny surface. But one day, a demon whispered in his ear, and he was again tempted to look into the blade. There he saw a face so abominably deformed and repulsive that he turned the weapon on himself and cut off his own head. Devil's Scale. In a time when gods and mankind still lived together on earth, a great war raged between the gods and the demons. The nights burned red, and scores of gods fell victim to hellfire. The conflagration burned for 10 days. Then a flood covered the earth for 100 days. And then for 1,000 days, great tempests swept the land. All plants and animals were turned to dust. But at last the gods struck down Belial, master of the giants and mightiest of the demons. They shut him up in his hell, sealing the entrance with layer upon layer of thick ice. It is said that the blade of the pole axe is made from the scale of the demon Belial's hide, cut from him when the gods sealed him into his hell. Reaper's scythe. They say that the Reaper waits by the gates of Hades. With the scythe he cuts the passage to the eternal darkness, a place from whence no soul has ever returned. The man was sentenced to enter dark Hades. He waited beside the Reaper as the grim god sliced open a passage to the darkness. At that moment the man swung his sword at the Reaper. The blade struck home, and the Reaper felled. "Foolish human," he laughed, "your sword cannot help you now." As he spoke, the scythe rose up and cut off the man's leg with one blow. The true guardian was not the Reaper, it was the scythe, and by the gate it waits for each sinner in his turn. Apostate's misery. There was once a wind spirit who fell in love with a mortal man, though it was against all laws of her race. Each day she allowed her love and passion to grow. The spirit was condemned to death for the betrayal of her race. The Lord of Spirits sent vassals to carry out the sentence, armed with a bardach enchanted to slay spirits. Sensing that her life was in danger, the spirit made one last visit to the man she loved, then fled through the forest and seas and mountains, pursued all the while by her would-be executioners. Some years later, a healthy young boy would be seen around the village. This remarkable boy could control the very winds. His father never told him who his mother was. Wind Singer. This bardach is imbued with the might anger of the storm god. Any victim that has the misfortune to be caught in the tempest will have his very flesh and blood blown clean off his bones. In a small village there lived a boy who could control the winds. Hearing of this, the jealous storm god came down to earth and challenged the boy to a duel of magic. They agreed to see who would be the first to remove a passing knight's cloak. While the god tried to blow a storm to tear the cloak away, the boy simply summoned the warm breeze that made the knight take off his cloak. Enraged that he lost to a mere mortal, the storm god summoned a wind that blew so hard nothing was left of the boy but his bones. At the same time, the storm of rage entered the knight's bardach. Mage's Promise. There was once two bandit brothers whose infamy was known both near and far. With 200 men at their command, none dared stand against them. One autumn, they began to terrorize a mountain village. The desperate villagers appealed to the traveling mage for help. The mage announced that he would help the villagers, but in exchange he would require a village girl as his wife. The mage then gave his mace to the brothers as a gift. No sooner had they accepted it than they began to fight. The whole gang took up arms, and in the end, not one bandit survived. But instead of giving him his reward, the villagers slew the mage. Soon thereafter, an evil plague fell upon them and left not one soul alive. Only the cursed mace remained. Charon Maker. During the first moon, it smashed the legs of 100 men, women, and children. During the second moon, it smashed the arms of 100 men, women, and children. During the third moon, it smashed the heads of 100 men, women, and children. During the fourth moon, nothing was left but a lake of blood and a mace dripping with liquefied flesh. Holy Mace. This fanged ceremonial mace was presented to the hierarch of an ancient kingdom by his 13 pupils. After the hierarch died, the nation broke down in chaos and strife. The young pupils tried to stay true to their master's teachings and avoid bloodshed, but still they fell one by one in the war, calling out helplessly for peace. Abhorring violence to the end and still refusing to wield the mace, the final remaining pupil was killed. As the bloody mace fell, a great god weeping black tears descended from the heavens. He gathered the 13 souls of the pupils and in exchange cursed the mace with a frightful power. Dragon Stroke. This is a mace made from the scales of a dragon. In the age long before the founding of the Union and Empire, man lived in terror of the subhumans. Tired of the oppression of the beasts, the people turned to a nameless young hero to throw off their yoke. To gain the strength he needed, the warrior resolved to enter a pact with a dragon. He challenged the dragon again and again, and lost again and again. Though he eventually beat the dragon, the creature was already a pact beast to another, and victory was in vain. But in recompense, the dragon offered a piece of her own wing. Armed with the mace forged of dragon flesh, the warrior battled the subhumans and brought peace to mankind. Pupil's Club. This mace was made by an apprentice wizard with a single swing of a blacksmith's hammer. However, this apprentice could conjure little more than small flame, as big as an ogre with an appetite to match. The apprentice did not look much like a sorcerer, and he found himself bullied by his master and fellow apprentices. One day, he and another apprentice began a violent argument that did not end until the giant wizard lost his senses, swung his mace, and struck his colleague dead. As it tasted blood, the mace absorbed the fallen princess's magic. The people realized that he could make the weapon even stronger, so he slew his master with a blow to his head. Spiked wisdom. The philosopher was troubled by the ancient question, what is man? From whence is man born? And to what purpose? Did the gods place him here on this world? The philosopher brooded on this question, his eyes cast skyward for the answers. Amidst all the creation, surely mankind had a special purpose. Then the philosopher came a realization. Amongst creation, amongst the stars, the sun, and the moon, only man has the power to destroy. Proudly, the philosopher announced his discovery. In the philosopher's audience, a single old man laughed. He took out a great mace and placed it before him. Right? He said. So this is the meaning of life? Iron scraps. A village of serfs suffering under the Lord's corrupt government cobbled together this mace to serve as a weapon in their rebellion. Its crooked frame was shaped by the blood of their toil. No matter how they suffered, the Lord would not grant the serfs relief. With cries of justice and freedom, they gathered into a crowd and marched against the overseer. As dawn broke, the peasants charged into the castle. There they found the Lord living as impoverished a life as their own, for as much as the Lord taxed the serfs, so was the Lord taxed by the king. The serfs took pity on their incompetent lord and cast aside their weapon. From then on, the serfs and Lord lived in harmony, hungry and destitute, together. Sorrow's companion. The mace owned by a warrior monk who was charged with fighting. When he sailed the seas with his son at his side, no pirate could feel safe. One day, they encountered a gang of pirates led by a wizard. The wizard summoned a sea dragon to fight by their side, and during the fierce battle that ensued, the monk's son was slain. Rendered mad by the loss, the monk slaughtered the pirates and the dragon, but no matter how much he raged, he could not bring his beloved son, and the monk soon died of grief. Eventually, the sad tears of the monk reached the merciful god of the sea. In sympathy, the god took the monk's mace and made it powerful with magic and the talons of his own claws. Skull's Banquet. A mace that belonged to a priest who gave his soul to demons. When his cult was still young, the demons spoke to him, commanding that he gather fresh souls. The priest offered sacrifices after sacrifices to the demon, crushing each victim's head in turn. Blow by blow, the mace brought his ambitions closer to his grasp. As the cult grew, so did the mound of the crushed skulls. But then the skulls shifted and transformed, turning into the face of a man the priest knew all too well. The face was the priest's own. He had paid the ultimate price and was turned into a demon. He rose and bid farewell to his earthly body. Soul Dozer. A fearsome hammer that has the power to steal memories. With each blow of the weapon, the victim loses more of himself till he forgets his own identity. One day, a soldier who carried the burden of a sorrowful past acquired the hammer. He began to strike himself in the head so that one by one his memories began to disappear. But as each unhappy memory was extinguished, an earlier one welled up in its place. Deaths of his comrades, the unhappy decision to become a soldier, the murder of his parents. When at last all the sad thoughts were gone, and only the memories of a child full of hope and promise remained, it was too late. The soldier's skull was broken. He fell over dead. Dragon Storm. Due to the scheming of a vassal, an unwilling princess was sent to be married in a neighboring land. On the way to the wedding, her caravan was set upon a gang of thieves hired to kill her. Against the determined brigands, the princess's guards had no defense, but as the death blow was about to be struck, a guard sacrificed his own life and summoned a storm dragon. By the time the storm dragon had slain all the bandits, the guard had breathed his last. The dragon imbued his hammer with his own strength and the soul of the soldier who had created him. Then, in accordance with the soldier's dying wish, the princess bore the hammer with her into battle, wreaking dread revenge on her treacherous vassals. Treasure Builder. There was once a man who built beautiful buildings that became treasures of his kingdom. So many treasures did he create, people came to say that his hammer was a tool of the gods. But one day, a war broke out between his country and its neighbors. All the men of his kingdoms were called to join the army, and the builder was no exception. The man who hated destruction was no warrior. In the midst of the war, the architect was killed, and the beautiful towns and buildings he created were reduced to mere broken rock. Until the moment of his death, the builder did not once take another man's life. Will the next owner of the hammer of the gods be a lover of creation or destruction? Tyrant's Hammer. In a land ruled by a gang of demons, 10 young idealists resolved to take up this weapon and rise up against the evil overseers. But not one of the cowed citizens rose to fight with them. The human rebels were nonetheless victorious. The demons were vanquished. As the rebels rebuilt the government, all agreed the weapons they used were imbued with the power of God. But the young leaders began to forget their ideal world without fear. With secret informers and public executioners, their rule turned into one of terror and tyranny. The people rose up against them. The 10 were arrested and sentenced to public execution. Once again, the people would witness the power of the weapon that had chased away the demons.